Good. So yesterday we were doing some stuff in Code Sandbox. I thought we would revisit it. We'll do a new sandbox though, kind of an entirely new project. So I'm going to create a sandbox here. Vanilla JavaScript. All right, and we got our same kind of setup, right? So I can try to squeeze this out a little bit. Oh, okay. I got to learn how to use this thing. So we've got this JavaScript right now that's doing some stuff, right? It's creating this output on the page. Let's get rid of that because we're pretty much going to be starting from scratch here. And now one of the things that I want to do this time around is I want to create an idea of a component. This is something that we're going to see in React later on, and hopefully what we're going to do today will sort of mentally prepare you for this idea of a component. So does anybody have any idea what that might be, what a component would be in JavaScript? Yeah, exactly. So it's essentially a piece of code that we can use in different places. So maybe I have, for instance, an unordered list component, right, that always kind of behaves the same way. What else is sort of reusable when we write JavaScript or functions, right? So we're going to have a couple different kinds of components that we can use in React. There are what's called functional components and also class-based components. Okay. Today I think we'll probably do a class-based component just because we were just talking about OOP, some questions about inheritance, so we can kind of get that into the mix. So I propose, let's create a file here. Oops. I don't want to rename that one. Let's create a new file that's sort of going to act as our component class. It'll be the thing that we use every time we create some other component. All right, so I'll just say component, oops, .js. All right, and inside here, what I want to do is I want to actually create this class, right? So we'll say class component. All right. And then how am I going to give other files access to this component? Can anyone guess how we might do that? We might need to, yes, question. Yeah, let's export it, right? So I'm going to say export default component. Okay? So what this is saying right here, and we're going to be seeing this syntax a lot throughout the stack, is when we export from this file, by default, we want to get this component class right here. Okay? So when I import from this file, I'm going to get that class. Any questions about that?
Yes. Export has to happen after, or it could be like way on the top.
So yeah, what would happen if I tried to export something that wasn't yet there? Yeah, we might have a problem, right? Because at this point in my code, the code is component defined. And in fact, you can see here, it was used before it was defined. Okay, so we don't want to do that. We want to export down here. You could also, if you're feeling, if you like this syntax a little bit better, I could say export default class like that. That would work. Yeah, Albert.
And in terms of component, is that a keyword or is that arbitrary up to you?
It is going to be a keyword with React, and so I'm just sort of borrowing that terminology. Yeah, but in terms of JavaScript, no, that doesn't mean anything. I'm just creating a class, and I happen to call it that. Yeah.
And then when you export default, if it was in JavaScript, not in React, export default would have to match the class name. If it was in separate line.
Yeah. Yeah, if that's the thing you want to export, it has to match this name, right? Yeah, exactly. Or if I was exporting a function or whatever, we would have to have whatever we're exporting match the name of that function. Okay.
Also, the name of convention, it is like the Java, the file name and the class name should be same, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's flexible. It wouldn't throw a problem, throw an error if I were to name it something else. I can call it whatever I want. I'm just calling it that because, as you said, more just for convention's sake.
And the first
Right.
edges would be capital.
Yeah, like some Pascal casing here.
Then is it only one component per file, or can you have multiple components?
No, I can default export multiple things. So let's say I had another function down here. I'll just call it SumFunc. And then if I want to export both of these guys, I can say export an object, and then in the object I can put my component and also SumFunc, like that. Okay. All right. So let me get rid of all this. Okay, cool. So we've got our component here. Now, we probably want to have some kind of a constructor function, right? So when I build a component, maybe I want to run some code. All right. All right. And I'm thinking to myself, what do we want to take in when we create a component? What were the things that we needed when we were sort of adding things to the DOM yesterday? Okay, yeah, we're kind of on the right track. Basically, I want to pass in the actual DOM node that I'm trying to attach this to, right? So we'll say as the second argument, we'll take in some kind of a node. As the, what do we want to take in for the first argument? So for the first argument, maybe we want to take in what we're trying to create, right? So let's just say create, what do we want to call this? Element? Okay. And then inside this, so how are we going to connect that element to this node that we're trying to attach it to? Does anybody remember? No? Remember that append child? Right? So we could say something like node.append child. And then we would put the element in there. Okay. Okay, so let's export this. I don't know where that went. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much all we're doing right now, right? I'm just saying let's take in some element that we've created, and then let's take in a node that we want to attach that to, and then we're saying the node is going to append that child, whatever element we've created. All right? Any questions about that? No?
The node is also the variable?
It's a parameter to this constructor function, right?
Which you named it.
I named it, yeah. So this isn't like any kind of a key word, but it is a DOM node. So it's some element in our document object model that we want to attach this thing to. All right. Cool. So let's just kind of keep that like that for now, and then let's create a specific component. So over here, I'm going to create another file, and we'll just call this button. Okay. Inside my button component, what am I going to need if I want to have access to this class right here? I'm going to have to import it, right? So here's how we would do that. So I can say import component, oops, from /component. Okay. Cool, now I've got that. Now I want to create my actual button class, right? So how can I extend from that component class? Anybody? So let's say class button extends component. right? All right, fair enough. Now we'll say we probably have some sort of a constructor function. Okay. Now eventually I know that I'm going to need to call the constructor of the component class, right? So how did we say we're going to do that again? Super. Okay. And so what is my super going to need to take? An element and then a node, right? Okay, do I have either one of those things just yet? No, because I haven't yet created a button inside my constructor. So maybe I should probably create that, right? So let's say something like const button. Is this confusing to anyone if I use a lowercase versus an uppercase? This is case sensitive, so these are not the same thing, right? Okay. So const button equals document dot create element button. I guess I need to turn on that word wrap again. Toggle word wrap. Gosh, it looks so terrible though when it's wrapped. Okay. All right, so now that I've got this button that I created, I can actually run this super, right? Okay, so our super is going to take in the element, which is our button. But the second thing that I need is a node to attach it to. Do I want to hard code that in here? Or do I want to allow my button to determine where it's going to appear? Let the button say where it wants to go, right? So let's provide some flexibility in there. So inside of our constructor, let's take in the node that we want to attach it to, and then let's just add that in here, right? Okay. So what's the other thing that we probably want to know about this button in order for it to be of any use? If I just attach this thing to the DOM, am I going to see anything on the page? I mean, you'll see like some tiny little outline, right? But there's no text inside there, right? Okay, so maybe I want to also take that as well. So let's say we're going to take in some text. Okay. And now what I can do is, after creating the element, how can I set that? Does anybody remember? I've got a reference to this button that I just created, right? So how do I determine what goes inside of it? It doesn't have an ID. But I have a reference to it right here. Button.innerText. Okay? So that determines what goes inside there. So button.innerText equals text. Okay? All right, so now we should at least be able to see something. If we create a new button and we put we specify whatever text, we'll at least see that on the page, right? So let's see if we can get this going. Let's go back to our index.js here. And then here, in order for me to use that button class, what do I need to do? I got to import it, right? Because I don't have access to it if I don't do that. So let's just say import button from ./ and what that ./ means. Actually, does anybody know what that means before I say it?
Same directory.
Yeah, so inside of our current directory. Okay. All right, so I've imported my button. Now I want to create a button somewhere on the page. How do I do that? So I'll say something like const my button equals, what's the key word when we're creating a new instance of a class? New. So I'm going to have to say new button, okay? And what I needed to pass to the new button was some text and then also where I wanted to append that to, right? So let's just say, we'll call it click me. And then I'm just going to append it to, actually, let me grab a reference to that app element, right? So we'll say const app equals document.getElementById app. Okay, so I want to append it to the app right there. Button.default is not a constructor. Why is that? Because I never exported it. So watch out for these things. Export default button. Okay, so now we've got ourselves a nice button here, and we're actually using some inheritance inside of that, right? Okay. All right. Now that button's not really so great because all it does is it's just kind of staring at us doing nothing, right? Maybe we want it to actually do something when we click on it. So how can we accomplish that, do you think? We've got this nice little button class. I'm taking in text right now. What else might I want to take in if I wanted to have some click behavior? Say that again? Yeah, so not the event listener itself, but maybe we want to take in some function that we want to run when the button is clicked, right? Okay, so let's say, we'll just call it callback. Or we'll say, how about we call it click handler? Okay, now how do we add this click handler to our button? Does anybody remember? Add. No. Did anyone do that DOM assignment? You did. You should know how to do this, right? How do we connect this click handler that we're going to take in to this actual button so that when I click on it, it actually runs that function? Yes, there it is, right? Okay, so after I've created this element, I'll spread this out a little bit here. So let's say button dot add event listener. Okay, and what I'm going to pass to this is going to be click. The second argument is going to be what? So I'm listening for a click, and then what's the function that I want to run? Somebody said it over there. Yeah, click handler, right? So what's kind of weird about this? Does anybody feel like this is strange? Everything, yeah. All right. So what's different, and maybe that you guys are a little bit unused to, is that we're sort of passing these functions around as if they're any other data type, right? Well, in JavaScript, they actually are. So they're considered first-class citizens. We can chuck around functions like they're whatever. No big deal, right? So ultimately, when we add this event listener, we're saying, here, click event, take this entire function definition, and then when you get clicked on, go ahead and run it for me, right? So I'm not running it right now, and that's why we don't see. How do we know that we're not running this function? Well, just syntactically. So I mean, we don't have parentheses right here, right? That's saying this function is not being invoked. I'm giving you the entire definition. Okay. So this is where the concept of callbacks comes into play, is that we're essentially just handing a function down to some other code and saying, when you're ready to run this, go ahead and run it on my behalf. I'm not running it directly. Okay? Does that pretty much make sense to you guys? That's ultimately what a callback function is. It's some function that we are not running directly. We're passing it along for some other code to run on our behalf. Okay? All right, cool. So we've added our click handler now. Now, in order for that to actually do anything, back in my index.js, I need to also pass that in when I create a new button, right? So this is going to be my click handler. I'm going to create an anonymous arrow function. And then inside that arrow function, let's say that we just want to console log something for now. Just keep it pretty simple, right? We'll say console.log you clicked the first button. Okay. And let's see what that does. So I've got my little console over here that I can click on. So if I click this button, we're actually getting that console log, right? And a whole bunch of times, right? Now, what makes this kind of cool is that I now have this reusable piece of code that I can create a whole bunch of different buttons with. And I want those buttons to have sort of some similar functionality in that each button can have some custom text that I provide, and each button can have some special click handler to handle when it's clicked on. Okay? So it doesn't have to be the same for every button. Each one can have its own little handler. So let's say I want to create another button, right? Const second button equals a new button. Okay, and we'll put the text on this. We'll just call this second button. Okay, maybe I want to append this to the app still. And then my callback function this time would just be something to let us know that we clicked on the second button. So you clicked on the second button. Exclamation point. All right, so now we got two buttons. This is great. I can click on one. I can click on the other one. Everything's working as expected, right? Pretty cool. All right. Now, the question comes, is that what if at some point during the life of my application, I actually want to remove one of these buttons? Because right now they're sitting there, and that's all good. What if I wanted to, say, remove one of these buttons after a certain number of clicks? Yeah, we might have to do that, right? Good. All right, so this is going to get a little more complex, but at least we'll have some sort of interesting functionality that might teach us something. So inside of our button class here, let's say in the constructor, let's set up how many times this thing's been clicked on, right? So how can we do that? Well, because I'm inside of this class, I can use a certain keyword, right? This. And I can reference the actual object itself. So I can just say up here, this.clickCount equals 0. Okay. What is it complaining about? Cannot set property click count of undefined. Why would this be undefined? Aren't I inside my constructor? What's in the button? Oh, this is not allowed before super. Whoops. Okay. Okay, fine. let's bring this down then. We got to call super first. Okay, so now we're okay. We've got our click count as 0. The other thing that I want to do though is we have to kind of change the way that we're handling clicks, right? Question.
So it's saying that this can exist without generating a button first, right? It doesn't understand this until you have.
Yeah, so contextually, we can't actually use this keyword unless we've called super, because again, we're extending another class, right?
And that's not the case for the other Follow the lines above it.
Are you asking how come that's not the case, or?
Yes. Like
Well,
why?
am I using this anywhere inside here? I'm not, right? I'm just creating some things. I haven't used this keyword until down here. So it's cool. All right. But our event listener right now, all it's doing is it's just going to run whatever the click handler was, right? And I want to create some kind of custom functionality here. So let me bring this down. Okay. And then instead of just passing in the click handler, what should I do at this point? Create another callback, perhaps? You guys feeling adventurous? All right, so I'm going to create another anonymous callback inside here. And then inside there, what we're going to do is we're going to increment the count, right? So we'll say this dot count plus plus. Yeah, well, thank you. Okay, this click. Okay, so we're incrementing that, and then we want to check and see if it's over a certain number. So maybe it's like, it's over, I don't know, 5. Yeah, that's a good nice number. So let's say if this dot click count is greater than 4, what do we want to do? Yeah, we want to actually remove it from the DOM, right? Like get rid of it. Else what we want to do is we want to run that click handler that was passed in when we created the button, right? Okay. So how do I call that click handler? Same way we call any other function, right? Just like that. Okay, cool. All right, now we have to figure out, well, how can we remove something from the DOM? Well, I have a reference to this button right here. I should just be able to call remove on it. Okay, so DOM elements have this method that we can use to take them back off the page. So I can say button dot remove. All right, so let's give this a try. Let's click it. Hey, magic, right? So our stuff is disappearing after 5 clicks. Cool.
Is there any in this example, is there a difference between remove and hide or toggle hidden?
Yes, there is. So hiding something doesn't actually remove it from the DOM, right? All it does is it changes the display property. So display goes from, if display was block, it would go to none. So yeah, complete difference. In this case, it's completely taken out of the HTML.
So there's no way to
It's not even there.
this until you refresh the page.
Right. Yeah, so if you're on Code Sandbox, you should be able to click this little refresh thing. And then it does that. What the heck? You can also launch it in a different window too, which maybe would be better. I don't know why it didn't refresh though. Okay. So yeah, there are buttons up in there, right? Now another question is, even though we've removed this thing from the DOM, did it actually remove our click listeners? It didn't. And this is where, and part of the reason I want to show you guys this is so that you sort of see, again, what is the problem that a framework like React is trying to solve? So for us, if we're creating these things and we're adding these event listeners to them, we also have to manually clean up after ourselves every time we're going to remove something from the DOM. Okay? Otherwise, what's going to happen is that the memory usage of JavaScript in the browser is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. You'd have all these listeners that were left behind every time that you remove something from the DOM, which is not very good. Yeah. Any other questions about what we did? I want to go through it kind of line by line a little bit, but before we get there, is there anything that sort of like rubbed someone the wrong way or doesn't make sense? Baxter, callbacks. Did we kind of touch on it in a way that it's
We touched on it in a way that makes it more clear.
good? So if you had to explain callbacks right now, how would you do it?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Relax.
If you had to explain them, I wouldn't. I just wouldn't do it. All right, someone else take a stab at it. Who wants to explain callbacks, the concept of a callback function?
I don't, but I have a question. Does a callback take a name? Like you said an anonymous.
Mhm.
So
So it can be either thing. It could be a named function or it could be an anonymous
why
one.
did you choose anonymous instead of anonymous is like hard coding it and like
Well, anonymous just simply means that it doesn't have a name. That's all.
but you cannot reuse it.
Correct. Yeah. So anonymous functions tend to be good for when you have a function that's maybe only going to be used in one spot. Now, if I'm going to use code in multiple places, anonymous is not really going to help me there, right? Because now I'm going to have to define the function again, potentially. So that's not good.
And
Alright.
then it would be before the parentheses. In the callback?
Oh, down here on line 14.
Yeah, if it went anonymous.
Yeah, so what we would do if we wanted to give it a name, we could say something like function my callback. And then I would take out this forward arrow here, right? So then I'm still sort of defining it in line, but this would potentially be available to other code. Or I could even define it outside. Let me just drag this whole definition out here somewhere. Oops. So if I cut that out, and this might be easier to look at actually, if I just put that function inside there, then I can pass in the name, right? Does that still kind of make sense to you?
That's nice.
So yeah, here we're defining the function, and here we're actually passing it in as the callback. Okay. All right, cool. So let's go through this a little bit. I'm going to start with index because that's where all the magic was happening in the beginning. So let's do lines 1 and 3, Prativa. You see, okay. 1 through 3, I should say. You just kind of go line by line.
So at line 1 we are just importing the button. Right?
Yeah, we're importing the button class
Yeah.
specifically. Yeah, good.
And
Alright.
in line 2
And where's it coming from? So the dot slash means what? The same folder that we're in. Exactly. Okay, good. Next line.
As the const app, we are creating the variable app
Mhm.
in order to get that DOM from the HTML.
Yeah, what is this app again? So we're not getting the entire DOM, but what are we getting? When we say get element by ID,
The element.
we're getting that specific element, right? I'm grabbing that div that has an ID of app. Good. All right, cool. Next, lines 5 through 7, Lawrence.
It's a variable my button
Okay.
to a new button and the function, the name click me, and I gonna use app. It's gonna
Okay,
be
so click me was the text that we want to appear on it, right?
a text area.
App is what?
Is a node. No.
It is, right?
No,
It's a
no.
DOM node. It's this
DOM
DOM node right here. We grab that element by ID. Good.
Yeah.
All right. And then the third thing that we included there was
That's
what?
That's a callback function.
That's a callback function, and you can see it's this anonymous arrow function, right? Has no name.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Now inside that function, so as soon as this button is clicked on, what did we want to have happen here?
To a console log, you click the first
You
button.
click the first button. Yeah, exactly. All right. Lines 9 through 11, Erica.
second button, which
Second
is
button.
the next to that one.
Mhm.
We created a new button. This would be constructor. Are we doing that?
Yeah. So it's gonna invoke that constructor function, right?
Okay.
Okay.
And the text that is in it is second button,
Good.
which is connected to the DOM with the node app.
Okay. That's where we want to append it is app. Okay. And then third argument.
Anonymous arrow function.
Yes.
Which means when we click,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to console log out if you click on the second button.
Yep. Okay, very good. Perfect. So now let's go back to our button class and make sure that we get this pretty well. Francis, tell me what's happening in, let's say, lines 1, 3, and 26.
I
No,
was like, oh.
I know. But I'm not going to ask you to do the entire class definition. Just what's
Okay.
happening here, and then down at the bottom.
You scared me. Well, we're gonna import the component from that same folder.
Yeah.
From that file called component.
Right.
And then we're gonna create a class called button.
Yeah.
Which takes in, or which takes in component.
Doesn't take it in, it extends it, right? So we're inheriting from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. And then down at the bottom, what are we doing?
And then we
26.
just export that button.
Yeah, we're saying if we import from this file, by default, we will get this button class. Okay, cool. All right. So since we've imported component, now we got to kind of look at that, right, and see what that's actually doing. Okay, Nick, tell me what's going on in lines 1 through 5.
We're creating a class called component.
Yes.
We have a constructor function that's taken in an element and a node.
Good.
And then we're appending the child to the node, the element that we passed in.
Right. Exactly. Okay, cool. On line 7, Greg, what are we doing there?
Exporting the default to the default.
Yeah, so we're saying when we export from this file or when we import from this file, we will by default get this thing, right? This class. All right, now inside the button. So give me a little bit of the constructor. Let's do lines 4.
Can you give the node the name of our?
It's from the HTML.
Yeah, I could change this. So what if I didn't want to call it node? I could call it, say, mount point if I wanted to, right? Like this is where I want to mount this thing. That would be fine too. You just have to make sure that these two guys match, right?
No, I mean the op name. Like
The what name?
you name the node op. It's,
I
Well,
think
you
an
made
index.
like the
The
index.
app is the name of the node of the mount point.
Yes, that
So yeah, this was inside the index.html that Code Sandbox gave us. There was already that div with that ID. Yeah, so we're just kind of grabbing a hold of it. We have a reference to it. Okay, cool. So let's go back to our button here. Okay, so let's do lines 1 through 5. Baxter.
We are importing component from the same folder.
Good.
We're creating a class with a button that's going to inherit
Very good.
component.
From component.
Okay, we're creating our constructor. We're taking in the text
Right.
that we can put inside of a button,
Mm-hmm.
node, and click handler.
Good.
Node doesn't exist anymore.
What do you mean?
Change it.
Oh, it's changed to my
No.
mouse
Point or whatever.
I like node better.
No, but we changed it.
Did what I did break the code? Ask yourself.
Yes.
Those are variable.
Shouldn't have, right?
No, yeah.
Nothing should have changed there.
Those are variable. Order.
Yeah, so remember the thing that we had in that other class was a function. And it determined, okay, for this function, I'm going to call it mount point. That doesn't mean that when I invoke the function, I have to invoke it with a variable called mount point. It just means that's the name of the parameter, right?
The order in which you pass in the arguments needs to parallel
Yes, that does matter. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Okay, good. All right, so did you do line 5 as well, Baxter? No, right? Don't try to get out of this. I'm kidding.
All right, and we're creating a button that's the signed value of the element we're creating button.
Yeah, so I'm creating this constant variable, and I'm saying document, let's actually create a button element, a button HTML element. Good. All right, and then let's do lines 8 through 11. Geo. Well, that should be pretty self-explanatory. Just see if you can read through it and say, like, we're doing this.
So, yeah, the text could go inside the button.
Yes. So I'm saying I want the inner text to equal what? Text that we took in here in this constructor function, right? Okay, so that was the parameter. All right, and then what does this mean on line 10? What are we doing there? What does using this super keyword do? And invoking it. So we're invoking it, right, with the parentheses. What does that mean? It means I'm calling the constructor function of the parent class, right? So the parent class needed to take in what kind of element, or the actual element, right? And it also needed to take in where did I want to mount this thing. All right? Line 11, I'm pretty sure you got that, so what are we doing there?
Just counting the amount of times you click it.
Okay, so we're attaching this click count property to the object itself, right? And we're setting it to 0 initially. All right, good. Let's see, lines 13. Who hasn't got? Oh, Hutan.
Create a function
Good.
called callback.
Yeah.
I still don't know what this does.
So this is referencing what?
This
This references this. It's the object itself, right?
what the count?
So the object itself now has this property called click count. We set that up when we invoked the constructor, right? I gave it a click count initially, and I said click count is 0. Hasn't been clicked on yet.
Okay.
Okay.
So this click count is count plus plus.
So that means that we're doing what to it?
Adding to it.
We're incrementing it by 1. Good.
And then if this click count is greater than 4, and then it will remove button and else click handle it. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so here's what we're saying is, if it's greater than 4, that means that this is the 5th time that we've clicked on it, right? Then I want to actually remove it from my DOM. I want to actually take it off the HTML page entirely. I'm not just hiding it, I'm taking it away. All right? Otherwise, what I'm doing here, we've got these parentheses that tell us what? This should tell you something because we saw this in Python too, right? Anyone want to help Utan on that? We are calling the function, right? That's what those parentheses tell us. Okay, cool. I think we got through everything. Any questions? Thumbs on this?
Thumbs in a few minutes.
Thumbs in a few minutes. A little sideways over there. Ooh, big sideways. All right, you sideways people. What clarifications do you have?
I just need a word.
I just need to work.
Not that I'm kind of like.
I think the hardest part is to remember like all the keywords. What do they actually come with?
Yeah.
Like super and the biz.
What does what?
Where you should use them. But I think that's overall in programming. So.
Yeah, so in that super use, again, we've seen that before as well, right? In Python, like where we're actually trying to call the initializing function of the parent class. Same thing here. It's just the syntax is a little bit different.
It's kind of like half a question. Just out of curiosity, for adding event listener, can you have like double click, right click, left click, instead of just regular click?
Double click. I don't think that is an event. I could be wrong about that though. That's JavaScript. I am wrong about that. When it's rapidly clicked twice. Nice. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, and there are a bunch of, you guys can check the docs here if you want to see some different events as well. But yeah, you just go to the developer.mozilla.org if you want to check the docs. Yeah. All right, cool. So let me stop this.